Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, and I am excited about today's shows. We have two special guests from the Undroppables, Scott Boulanger, aka Jax Falcone, aka on Twitter, Dino Game Theory, and we've got Chalk from the Undroppables. You see, if you're watching here on YouTube, at 101 Chalk on Twitter. Guys, thank you so much for being here. I am looking forward to talking to you. Let's just get started. And Chalk, you can go first, and then Scott, join right in. What do you guys have going on over at the Undroppables right now?
Yeah, so we have a ton of exciting stuff right now. We're knee deep in the rookie prospecting cycle, diving in, looking at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end prospects in the 2024 class. So we're really doing our analysis of the prospects, determining what our rankings are. And then speaking of rankings, Scott and I are doing a full refresh of our dynasty rankings, kind of top down, bottom up approach. Given all the changing landscape in the NFL. So I'll hand over to Scott to kind of touch on what else we're doing over at the Undroppables.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're doing a lot. The Undroppables is definitely a collaborative of passionate people creating content. That's what we are. And so we've got people doing all sorts of stuff, but obviously the basis of what Chalk and I do is try and make sure that we're giving actionable advice for dynasty gamers. My show is a weekly show. It's the Undrafted. You can find it where podcasts are found. But on that show, I bring in a variety of different dynasty minds and fantasy football minds to try and crack the code, right? So it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun on that show. But trying to be the very, very best dynasty gamers we can be. And we love fantasy football. We love football. But Chalk and I both found early on that we have a proclivity towards dynasty fantasy football, and we're very good at it. And we wanted to share some of our sort of secrets and things that we do and practices that we sort of, stick to that have helped us be successful over time. And that's the genesis of what he and I do.
I do think that this part, dynasty, this segment of the fantasy football community probably draws those people who have had success, right? You don't want to be drafting these guys and keeping them forever if you finish 10th every year.
True.
You want to play dynasty fantasy football because you think you're smarter than everyone in your redraft league. And now I'm going to go draft guys and get to keep them forever.
That's somewhat true for sure. I also think there's a bit of a uniqueness to it where there's a lot of sort of, churning of value. And if you're the type of person that can sort of see that coming and understand how to, sort of capitalize on value and understand rising and falling assets and all that sort of thing, then if you see the game that way, it's kind of fun. I've also described it, Heath, and this may, for those who play Madden, redraft is like playing in arcade mode. Dynasty is like playing on franchise mode. That's basically it.
Absolutely. That was I would always get to a point with that game, and I haven't. I play against my son every once in a while now. I don't play the full dynasty mode, but I'd always get to a point to where I didn't hardly find myself playing the football games anymore.
Yeah,
I would just simulate through all the game action, and I want to get to the trades and the draft picks and all that stuff.
Yes.
So I do think that's probably not that uncommon amongst dynasty fantasy football managers. I think today's show is going to be great for you guys. We are going to get you an edge in your startup draft and your rookie draft, an off-season edge and in-season edge. We're going to talk about the Art of Dynasty and the Anatomy of series. Of course, as we always do, we'll start with 3 questions for our guests. I'll have you both answer these questions. It can be the same answer, but I'll address it to one of you first. The other one can follow. Chalk, we'll start with you, and just feel free to follow up, Scott. What's the biggest edge strategically in dynasty leagues right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think Scott mentioned it just a second ago, but I think it's attacking the market inefficiencies that we're seeing across dynasty leagues, right? There's a disparity in perspectives and player takes and player evaluations. I think a website that I like to actually, really use for more research purposes, like Keep Trade Cut. I could see, where the consensus or the crowd is kind of valuing certain players. Jax just recently tweeted something about Dallas Goedert, being a buy. And, for me, when I look at that and I compare it with, Jackson, my rankings, our consensus rankings, and I notice a disparity or inefficiency in the market, I'm going to attack those, right? If I see a player that's being undervalued, I'm going to send out trade offers.
Yeah, I think for me, the other thing too, I love that what Chalk just shared. I was looking at, I think taking a long-term view. I think right now the most dynasty gamers are a bit fickle, and I think a lot of times they're sort of there's a new sort of DFS mindset to dynasty where guys are making trades on a weekly basis, just trying to get the next new hotness for that week and win every week. And it's actually quite impressive to watch some of these people play that way. But I think that's where there's a ton of value seeping out of these transactions, long-term value, where you can build that juggernaut. Dynasty is something where, Ryan McDowell sort of famously coined productive struggle. And we do sort of a modified productive struggle in the way that we actually don't like to struggle too much, but we like to understand that, maybe pushing a little bit into the future is wise. But in doing that, it's easier to do sometimes when you're playing with really sort of a lot of win now, DFS minded gamers that are out there. So I think that's one of the bigger advantages that still exist, amazingly, in Dynasty. Yeah,
there are a lot. I talk about, and I'm a sicko. I really enjoy teams at the end of their rope and going through that rebuild process.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about that on Twitter. And there are people who play Dynasty fantasy football who just can't imagine the idea of sacrificing 1 year's entry fee.
Right.
They have no stomach for it. And that's fine. Like you can play Dynasty in a variety of different ways. There's lots of ways to attack it. But I do think you're right. Like if you're playing in a league with people like that, it makes it much easier. Where it gets hard, and I've had this happen before too, is when you've got 4 guys thinking they're rebuilding at the same time, and then you maybe run short on buyers. Let's go to question number 2, Scott, and we'll start with you here. So, and Chalk, you kind of hit on this. Like there are guys who are market efficiencies just as players. Who do you think the biggest edge in terms of player eval in Dynasty right now? And it doesn't have to necessarily be an individual; it could be an archetype of a player as well.
That was interesting. I sort of read that question when you shared it a little bit differently. I just think there's like you want to be ready to be wrong about your player takes. I think one of the things we do, or that people do, is they sort of have a player take and then they're afraid to sort of come off it because they'll look like they're, I don't know why. To me, it's like, be ready to be wrong. We say it all the time on our show, and have a very fluid approach to player evaluation because there's always new information. So as soon as there's new information, add it to your evaluation and then have new evaluation and continuously be doing that. I think for us, I use film and data, and I use film and data to try and understand a player's utilization. And I think utilization of player in the NFL is something that I still think most gamers are not considering in Dynasty. They sort of think player good, player bad, that's it. But in a lot of cases, it's like, well, what is player X going to be asked to do at the next level? I think that's a very, very big question, depending upon what type of player he was in college and all that sort of stuff. And I would just say that if you don't have the time to do that, find an analyst or a couple analysts who do and follow them. But if you can do the work yourself, that's where you can find a lot of inefficiencies in player eval.
Yeah, I want to really echo what Jack's is saying. I think, Heath will probably touch on this in a little bit, but, using that Bayesian inference, right, being water, being able to change the perspectives, like Jack said, be ready to be wrong. And I think that's the biggest edge you can have with player evaluation. When you start anchoring down, right, into a player take and you lock in, like, I don't like this player, or I really like this player, or one of your league mates has those sentiments, right, and you're able to kind of exploit that or take advantage of those kind of perspectives or locks. I think that's really an edge that you can take with player evaluation. And then, of course, Jack's going to talk about this later, but using archetypes, using the anatomy series that he's put a lot of time into to really evaluate players and understand how do they fit against or compare against, the most successful or the players that really kind of set the mold in terms of, elite production.
I do think that's one area where still doing so much redraft and weekly projections and weekly rankings really helps me and might help Dynasty players who are having a hard time with that embracing being wrong. If you want to embrace being wrong, just do weekly projections and rankings for a season and see how wrong you are every single week about if you're really good 35% of players, and then recognize that happens on a season long basis just as much.
Heath, we had talked about that on an earlier show that Chalk and I had done, that we found that doing projections gave us a huge advantage. It is an awful thing to do. I don't recommend doing projections to anyone. Like, I don't recommend it. It is not fun. It is.
I am starting 2024 projections in February.
It's painstaking. It's
yes.
too much work. It's not fun. There's no real payoff. It's kind of just like, oh, those are done now. All right, I guess I did them. But what really happens is when you start to look at each team, you start to say, okay, oh, well, wait a second. Where are the targets going to come from for player X or Y? And I have to figure this out. They can't all have 150 targets, if they're only going to throw the ball 400 times. It's like, so you start to really have to place these things. And when you have a finite resource of targets or carries or whatever, sometimes it's the other way around too. Like, you'll get to a team, you're like, well, someone's got to get the ball here. Who the hell's it going to be? You start to find the sleeper that way. So those are two ways that for sure, man, that one has been an eye opener for Chalk and I.
So we'll go to Chalk.
Agree.
Chalk first here on the third question, then Scott, that you can follow up. Your friends are starting a new dynasty league. Let's assume these are not your analyst friends. These are your non-fantasy football analyst friends starting a new dynasty league. And they said, you know what? You're the expert. One setting, one rule. We're not even going to vote on it. You get to choose. What are you using that one rule on, Chalk?
Superflex.
That is the most common answer that we get. I ask this question to almost every guest we have on, and almost immediately. Now, I will say, I do think when it comes to our analysis, the analysis that I see around the industry, it's maybe more weighted in terms of superflex leagues than the number of actual dynasty superflex leagues there are relative to one quarterback leagues. It's kind of like when PPR became a thing. We all jumped to PPR faster than everybody that doesn't do this for a living did. And then eventually everything caught up. And so maybe 5 years, 10 years from now, maybe 5 years, a majority of dynasty leagues are superflex. I know a majority of new dynasty leagues are superflex leagues. It's just all those legacy leagues that are not. Scott, do you have a second rule besides superflex? Because I know that you seem very much on board with that one.
Hell yeah. And for me, it's like, I didn't even think of superflex because it's so like, obviously, but we do a lot of superflex leagues now for sure. And it does actually create, strategy around the quarterback position, which I think is great. You actually have to do quarterback eval. Before it was just like, I can just plug and play. I'll find a quarterback. I'm not worried about quarterback. So quarterback's less of an edge, whereas now it is. But the one for me, I'll challenge where you went to PPR. We need to change. This is my hobby horse setting for sure. Chalk knows it. It is half PPR, half point per first down. I've seen Ian Hartitz post, these two plays. These two plays went for the same amount of fantasy points or whatever, and it's like this awful little dump off catch and this big first down run or something. And it's like, it's so true. Conversions are the biggest. They're one of the biggest stats in the sport. If you just look at conversion rate, third down and fourth down conversions, the team that converted more probably won the game. I mean, it is so huge. If you're watching your favorite team and they convert a big 3rd and 1, you are fist pumping. You're not fist pumping when it's 3rd and 15 and they dump off to some little scat back for 7. You're not. You're just like, all right, punt, fine, whatever. So I like to reward the plays that are big in real football, half PPR, half point per first down. And it just levels out some of those, those nonsense plays and elevates Nick Chubb's 2-yard run on 4th and 1.
I agree 100%. The pushback I think that you get on the half point per first down is there's not a lot of sites projecting point per first downs for the year. Yeah. And so how do I know? And I've seen some stuff out there. I think generally you can take yards and multiply it by 0.05 and you get pretty close to what first downs are going to be. Certain players, obviously, of different types produce more than others. But I do wonder, and you can start here, Scott. I'm going to go to question number 4, I guess, before we get into some Super Bowl talk. But you've got a league that's been going for 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Yeah. And you've started it as a 1 quarterback league, and you've started it as a full PPR or a non-PPR league. Like, I really don't find any way to make these changes in an existing league. If you started a dynasty league in terms of scoring settings, unless it's something that, it's hard to imagine even one that wouldn't impact the players on a roster. I guess you could try to do it 3 years in advance, 2 years in advance, but there's really no way to change these types of scoring settings in the middle of a dynasty, right?
I do agree in principle with you 1,000%. I think the only way is unanimous. In other words, if I've set up my team so focused on non-PPR and one quarterback that I have no quarterback depth, I've got no future picks, I've got no way to even get it, but I'm dominating in this fashion, and you're like, we're going to change it up. You got to get me on board too. Everybody in the league has to be on board. If everybody's on board and everybody agrees, then no problem. Then just do it. Then everybody's cool with it. But there's really no way to sort of make everybody do. I totally agree, because there's too much strategy. I mean, it's the number one thing we recommend, Chalk and I, in going into a dynasty league, is check the scoring, check the settings. Use your strategy specifically around that. So if it's our number one bit of advice, you can't just change it based on that. So yeah, I agree with you 1,000%. But okay. Unanimous, go right ahead.
Right. It is Super Bowl week. We're seeing all the videos from Vegas now. And so we ought to at least talk about the game just a little bit. The Chiefs and the 49ers. I know nobody can tell that's watching on YouTube who I will be cheering for in that game. But I thought it'd be worthwhile to get a couple of smart guys on here and ask them how they thought the game was going to go. Chalk, you have a Super Bowl prediction?
My heart or my head? Because I think my well, I mean, I think the 49ers are going to take it. I think this is their year. Sorry, Heath.
That's okay. That's okay. Was that your? Now I do wonder, was that your heart or your head?
That was actually my heart.
That was your heart. Okay. Excellent. That makes me feel a lot better. Scott, what do you got here?
It's funny because every single game, I mean, even last week, we've now the chorus of never bet against Patrick Mahomes, even though he didn't score in the second half, but still there's some magic there to Patrick, and I will not be choosing against him. Also, I think the bigger force at play is Oz Perlman, who earlier in the year at Jets Hard Knocks picked the Jets to win 31-21. But really, he didn't say that. He told Mecole Hardman, you will win 31-21. So Oz Perlman, I'm not going against him. Chiefs, 31, 49ers, 21. Book it.
Yeah, I think I would probably say Chiefs and the under. If I was in it, just because like their defense, it's so weird. Because even when I saw a breakdown the other day of how these two teams have spent their salary cap, and the Chiefs have spent so much more on offense, and the 49ers spent so much more on defense, and the Chiefs' defense is so much better than the 49ers and their offense.
So good. Yeah.
Other than Mahomes, their offense is so much better than the Chiefs. Listen, I think the reason it's so hard to bet against Mahomes is it's hard to believe this will be a game that's not a game in the fourth quarter. And it's hard to imagine Patrick Mahomes getting the ball on the final drive or with 5 minutes left and not going and doing what he needs to do.
That's it.
It'll probably happen at some point in the next 10 to 15 years, though.
Yeah, Brady comes back.
Well, that was painful.
Brady handed Mahomes his first regular season loss, his first playoff loss, and first Super Bowl loss.
That is very true, and I am hurting again now. All right, let's move on. Let's look at these two teams from a dynasty perspective, though. Do you have a favorite player from the Chiefs or the 49ers at cost in dynasty right now?
I love this question. I wonder, Chalk, if you go first, because I've got mine kind of locked in, but this is a good question, Heath. What do you think, Chalk?
I mean, I think for me, it's Brock Purdy, right? I think he's an enigma for many people, but I think it's Brock Purdy, and I'll probably touch on him throughout the show today because it's a topic or a player that's come up quite a bit for me.
And he's viewed mostly as like a high-end, mid-range QB2, I think, for dynasty purposes right now. And I agree with you. I've got him inside of my top 12 just because I do think, like, why is Kyle Shanahan going somewhere? Like, take one of those guys away, I still think Purdy's going to be pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, just the weapons he has, the offense he's in, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I gave this some thought, Heath. It's funny because it's certainly not any of the Chiefs wide receivers. They're Rashee Rice, and Rashee Rice is not a buy. Because he's so steamed up. I think, there's a really interesting conversation to have about Rashee right now. I think he definitely exceeded expectations, and I think he's going to have a role in that offense. I think what was I listening to? Oh, Rich Rebar and JJ Zacharyason's recent pod was really good. And they talked a little bit about Rashi and some of his limitations. No. He was like first in the NFL in yards after the catch or something like that, right there with Debo. And so his ADOT was super low, caught a lot of close to the line of scrimmage plays and took him deep. Very, very interesting analysis. I'll be looking into that as well with my Rashi Rice takes. But what about George Kittle? George Kittle has been like a top 5 tight end on a seasonal basis. He has been so good. And for some reason, they hold the offense against him. But at tight end, you're looking for ceiling. You're looking for a player that can win you weeks. George Kittle is 100% that. He is the best tight end in the NFL. From an NFL perspective, he's still a productive player for fantasy. And he's super efficient, and he's been super efficient over his whole career. He's actually 10 yards per target over the last 5 seasons. Absolutely incredible. That laps the field better than Andrews, better than all the tight ends that sort of qualify. So if he's that efficient, look, you just have to imagine sometimes when the volume gets turned up for him, it's certainly possible. As you said, their defense didn't look as good. Next year could be a more pass-heavy offense. Debo sometimes gets hurt. I know there's limitations with Kittle in that offense, but there's not limitations with him as a player. Right. We project in injuries to fade him. He's 30 years old, but tight end, hey, if you can get a 2 or 3 year window with an elite tight end, right now he's basically valued as the tight end 10 behind a lot of tight ends, including even Kelsey. Kelsey might not even play next year. I think he will though. But I think George Kittle's a huge buy. The other one, if you're really going to talk about Kittle, maybe going someplace, maybe it's like Noah Gray or something like that. That could be a player to buy sneaky.
Yeah, and I think that Kittle one, it highlights something I want to talk about here when we come back from the break. But that idea that, yes, I mean, he's turned 30. So for a chunk of the league, he's lost a large amount of his appeal. That yes. You'll look at a lot of trade charts or trade or just the evaluations, and he's being pushed down by those 33% of dynasty managers who are thinking, I don't want anybody 30 years old. Right. And I think it kind of, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but he's the type of guy where if you're a contender, you need to be willing to make an offer for him that's more than what he's actually valued at, because he's more valuable to you than he is to a lot of people in the league. Yeah. Let's take a short break here. When we come back, we'll get into the Art of Dynasty. Okay, so we are back. Chalk, I want to start with you. You've written this series on the Undroppables, the Art of Dynasty, 15 chapters. You basically wrote a book on the internet, and it's fantastic. Just kind of tell everybody what you set out to do and what they can expect if they go look at it.
Yeah. So, I mean, we were talking a little bit about this before the show started, Heath, and the Art of Dynasty is really, my way of approaching the game of Dynasty Fantasy Football and applying kind of my own kind of career background and my own kind of, I guess, life experiences and, some of the books I've read. Of course, I think we've all read The Art of War, so that's kind of where the inspiration for this really came from. But really taking the strategic approach and looking at the nuances of how to long-term plan, how do you manage a dynasty team. I come from a legal/risk management background. I'm not a data analyst, I'm not a spreadsheet merchant. So my contribution to the community, I felt that was to kind of lean on my experience and my education, which is kind of what I did, right? Focusing more on strategy and how to approach the game, how to plan, how to construct rosters and pivot between competing goals. So that's really kind of the essence of what the Art of Dynasty is and what I had set out to do.
Now, Scott, I know that you've probably been through every inch of this, and so I just wanted to, like, what if you're telling somebody what's the best part of the Art of Dynasty? What would you tell them?
That's a tough question. Yeah, I think it's that process over player take too. It's like whenever you're sort of, so many people are, the questions on Twitter is who won this trade, or, and I always tell Chalk, I'm always like, give me more information. I need more. I don't know who won that trade because I don't know what this other guy, what's his end game? Where is he going? Where is his team at? There's just so much. So when you have all these situations, you really want to be situation understanding and then you make some moves. And, I've made terrible trades in my day. No, really. I mean, we all
Right.
have. You look
Oh,
back,
yes.
son of a, what was I thinking? You can't win like that. You can't win thinking, oh, I'm just going to win every single deal. I know the players better than everybody else. That's sort of that Bayesian process to me is the biggest part, is like taking the information, being so happy to be wrong sometimes, is just say, not a problem. I'm going to move forward with the new information and move forward. To me, being Bayesian and that part of the series is something that, we challenge ourselves to do in every way, even with things like the Art of Dynasty. If there's something in there that's not right anymore, like, let's change it. Let's not stick to it. Nope, that's what we said. We got to stick to it. So that whole idea is exactly what, and really in business or entertainment or whatever you're doing, that's what you have to do. You have to stay relevant and continue to move forward, not look back.
You brought up trades, terrible trades, and every time I hear that term, I think about I'm in John Bosch's Auction Addicts League, and you know how a John Bosch league is, I assume. Like,
Yes.
And this was year one, and there's no trade deadline, of course. And so this was the peak Michael Thomas. Got hurt, I think it was week 14 or week 15, and I had made it to the semifinals, and I was pushing. So I traded him away for Cooper Kupp. And knowing that I was sacrificing the future to just get these last couple of weeks and win the inaugural year. And Kupp got hurt the next week. I lost in the championship game.
Ooh.
And was just devastated for a couple of months that I'd given up Michael Thomas, a 77% catch rate guy, 150 catches. Like, this guy's going to do this for 5 more years. And then Cooper Kupp turned into Cooper Kupp, and Michael Thomas never really played again. So
right, you never know.
Right, it's even when you think you lose a trade, sometimes you don't. The chapter 1 here, Chalk, makes sense. Startup drafts. Do you have just kind of a prevailing sentiment about startup drafts, like something you can do regardless of where your draft position is, regardless of what kind of league it is? Like, this is the thing you do to win startup drafts.
Yeah, I mean, Jax and I talk about this often. Jax actually, kind of wrote the initial kind of book on this tactic, and the cornerstone strategy in startup drafts is, trading back. I think nowadays it's very popular and very common, and sometimes extremely challenging to trade back, especially your early first round picks. But I think that's really the key, right? Being able to move around the draft board while accumulating, long-term assets such as rookie picks, or some of those like, 5th, 6th, 7th round picks, in kind of building teams, more around depth and long-term assets versus trying to trade up and getting yourself, 2 elite assets while giving up, mortgaging the future. So I would say that would be probably the cornerstone strategy for
Scott, the idea of trading back, does that necessarily infer that you are drafting for year 2 or drafting for year 3, or can you take that type of approach and still be someone who's competing in year 1?
I love it when a league mate says to me, or how the heck did he get all the future draft picks and he still got the best team? So no, I don't think you're competing for next year. You're competing right away. It does depend upon we talk about this all the time. It does depend upon the roster construction of the league. In other words, if it's a 10-team league, start 8, you don't really need to trade back because where are you trading to? You're only starting 8 players.
Right.
But most of these dynasty leagues now are super flex. They are start 10 or more. I play in some start 14. I mean, crazy stuff. But if you're starting 11 or 12 especially, that means depth now becomes more important than it is in a start 8 or start 9 or start 10. So it's 12 team and more and 11 starting positions or more. Trading back becomes even more valuable to year 1. But, I hear a lot of people, will say, well, I tried to trade back, but I couldn't. No, you didn't try and trade back. Because if you do want to trade back, you generally can. Depending upon your startup, most people play with like an 8-hour clock, which is a long time. But, because we're all busy, we're doing different things. We've got to take care of kids and sleep and work and all the, right? So we play this 8-hour clock. And I always argue a lot of times you might be on the clock and you may be one of only 1 or 2 people who know that you're on the clock. So it's not like nobody wants your pick. It's that nobody even cares that you're picking.
Right.
So sometimes you have to sort of start that conversation. Maybe you sit on the clock a little bit. Maybe you say, hey, You send out a few DMs. You maybe send out a couple of little teaser trades. Knowing your league, knowing who's up, and knowing who might want a player that's up, reaching out to you because Patrick Mahomes is on the board, and I say, hey man, Patrick fell to 103. Do you want to make a move here? And you start saying, well, maybe not. And then you start thinking about it for an hour, and then you call me back and you go, actually, what are you thinking about? So patience a little bit especially early in the draft. Look, late in the draft, you sit on an 8-hour clock in round 15, you might get a little bit of flack. Right. But early on, those picks and those leverage points are super important. And if you don't engage with somebody, at least one of those other managers in trade talks, you probably didn't do your due diligence. And look, I get it. If it's a low money league and you don't really want to spend all that time, I get it. But if you want to play the strategy as it's meant to be, you got to engage.
I think that's one of the biggest things. And like I hear a lot of people say, I can't get any trades done. And it's often because either you're trying to quote win every trade and in a way that they can't, or it's because you just it's not easy. Like maybe you have one or two guys in your league that are accustomed to sending trade offers out regularly. Right. The rest of them are mostly responding to offers or phone calls that they get. If you want to be someone who trade, I've multiple times had a player that I wanted to get rid of for a second or a third round pick, and I just go down the draft order and who will give me a second round pick and offer everybody in the league. Yes. But you're right. It does take some time, and some people don't want to spend that much time.
And I get that.
Right. Chalk, chapter 5 is titled The Iron Bank. Mm. What in the world is the Iron Bank, and how do I get one?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can't take credit for coining the term Iron Bank. That's one of our old friends, Mike Liu, who coined the term, years ago. So, hat tip to Mike. I don't know if you're listening. I know you retired from the content game, but I want to shout you out there. And the Iron Bank is really, a vault or storage of long-term assets that, can only appreciate in value, right? So they're insulated from, external factors that, can impact the value, right? So, for example, a player is susceptible to injury, to trade, to a change of coaching staff or scheme, right? And any of those things that happen, or he's benched, or maybe, there's some negative news on him, any of those things happen, that player's value is immediately affected negatively. But for the most part, rookie picks are those types of assets that are really immune, right? Rookie draft picks, especially those first round picks, are the safest assets to own in Dynasty, and they're going to increase in value. So the Iron Bank is really storing those rookie draft picks, not just in 2024, if we're looking at this year, but if you're able to get 2025 picks, even 2026 picks. I'm in leagues where people are just sending off 2026 picks it's 2 years off. Who cares? I'll throw a second in, right? And as a kind of a kicker in a deal. So that's where it is. It's accumulating these draft picks. And whether a draft class is strong or it's a good class or bad class, deep or not, those first round picks are always going to hold value. And then when the pick is on the clock, the value actually starts to increase. So the closer we get to these rookie drafts, the closer we get to combine and NFL draft, right? The fervor and the hype around rookies, continues to increase. A lot of Dynasty gamers are even, not really paying attention until February, March. And then that's when they're starting to pay attention. So, that's really what the Iron Bank is storing storing those draft picks.
Now Scott, I know that every Dynasty league is different. The league that we talk about often, our YOLO Dynasty League, is full of a lot of people that I can't convince that they should value draft picks a little bit more based on where they are. And then so in that type of league, I think accumulating the Iron Bank is a little bit easier. Some leagues, though, it seems to be impossible to get somebody to value current players because the obsession within the league on future picks is so that does this concept change at all depending on your league mates? Is there a type of league maybe where, or maybe if we're playing with all analysts, where maybe the picks do get overvalued a little bit?
Maybe, but I don't think so, actually. I think the Iron Bank is one of those things where it exists and you just need to find a way. Look, maybe you, instead of getting, a second, you get 2/3. Maybe that's the economy in that league, and still worth it. It's still worth, understanding that that's where I want to store value. And when we talk about storing value, we're talking about a team that may or may not really be trying to win, or maybe it is. I mean, if you sold Tyler Lockett for an early second, before the season, people would have been like, wow, it's a little light or whatever, future second, that's it. But now all of a sudden, Tyler Lockett is worth nothing. So,
Right.
if you'd gotten 2/3 for him, people would have yelled at you and called you, crazy. I remember I once sold Darnell Mooney after his first year or something like that for kind of light, a couple thirds or something. And people were very upset. Like, how do you give away a young, stud receiver like that? And the league kind of admonished me. And then all of a sudden he turned out to not be quite anything. He's actually not worth much. And, I ended up, turning those picks into value and going from there. So sometimes you just have to have the will to move off of a redundant asset on your team. If you're starting a guy and he's scoring points for you, it doesn't mean you just have to sell to store value. But when you're looking at your lineup, you're like, man, what am I doing with all these older receivers? I need to get off them. Sometimes packaging them, but no matter what the is to get there, you do want to try and store as much value as you can when you're storing value in the Iron Bank. Period. End of story. Yeah.
Okay, Chalk. Chapter 6 and 7 talk about rookie pick values and rookie drafts, and you kind of hit on one of the questions that I had. Like, we are rapidly approaching, if we haven't already gotten there, to the point where it does seem like there's a pretty big shift in the opinion of rookie pick values amongst league members. You're right. They're starting to actually think about the fact that there's going to be a new class of players coming in. So talk a little bit about how you value rookie picks, and then does your trade down principle only apply to startup drafts, or do you do that in rookie drafts as well?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I think with rookie picks and the values, I want to give another shout out to one of my friends, Eric, who put out a really cool rookie pick value chart. And in rookie pick values, they go in a cycle every year. It's the same cycle, right? So in season, right, they're not worth that much, right? You might have a league mate that's willing just to throw in a rookie pick or do a pick swap. Maybe it's I'll send you my third, but you send me a second back, and then I'll give you a player or or whatnot. And then and then as you kind of circle around, end of the season, right? There's teams that are now trying to really go for it, right, and go all in, so they're gonna just start selling rookie picks, right? I want to go for the ship, so I'm gonna like throw in some rookie picks to like get there, put me over the top, and then they kind of start to accumulate value again. Right now, like we're in February, so as we get closer, and I think when the pick gets on the clock, I mean, that's when the value really peaks out. And to the extent you can really hold your picks until you're certain what the prospect, rankings kind of look like to you. Like right now, what we're seeing like often is like the 106 is like the cutoff in a lot of these 2024 drafts, especially in a super flex setting. Because after that, maybe the elite tier kind of ends, which kind of brings me to the next point where you said, does the trading back philosophy also apply to rookie drafts? And I think, yes, it does. And this is where, having a tier-based, projection, kind of based process and rankings is very helpful, right? Because then you can identify, me dropping from, this is a conversation from maybe the 104 to the 106 this year. Maybe that's a move I want to make, or maybe from the 105 to the 107, that's a move I want to make because there's a player like Roma Dunze that I really like, and maybe he's gonna probably fall to 107, and if I have 105, I'll take that bet and I'll take a little bit on top, whether it's maybe another pick swap later on, and really trading back doesn't mean I have to gouge the other manager or take another pick, like a plus pick, but just a pick swap, right, where I give you a little bit here, but then I'm going to get a favorable move up, somewhere else. But I would say kind of using that approach is very helpful, and kind of having an idea of like who are some of the targets, right, in the rookie draft. Like in 2023, it was classic to kind of get back into the second round or move back into the second round from the late first because, a lot of people were maybe steaming up, someone like Dalton Kincaid in like the early or mid first. And we were looking at Sam Laporta in the second. So I was like, hey, well, I like Sam Laporta just as much, if not a little bit better than Dalton Kincaid. I think they're both extremely great young tight ends. But hey, why not trade back to the second? Maybe I'll pick up another second on the process, and then I'll also take Jaden Reed. So that's kind of what happened often with Jackson I, and as a common example of trading back in a rookie draft. And what that can produce.
I want to hit on that idea of rookie pick values and peaking this time of year or in a couple of months when the actual rookie draft happens, Scott, because the other side of that is it can be really dangerous as a contender to trade picks for players this time of year. Right. So when you're considering like maximizing that pick value in a situation where you've got a true contender, are you trying to add a player while still adding a lesser pick? Or are you just not really interested in trading for players this time of year?
I'm almost never trading picks right now. Like I don't even know. You'd have to do something.
Let's just say during the rookie draft. Like during the draft. You're
I was
on
gonna
the
say
clock
because,
in April.
Yeah, that's different. So then it's a matter of, then that's a great time because now you're leveraging the height of the value of the pick.
Right.
I always say, last year, right, there's no more fun thing to do than to push the button for Bijan Robinson. There's no more fun thing. Like, it's so fun to be on the clock and be like, bink, and you hear the thing, and then you got Bijan, you're like, yes, that's super fun. Because of that, it's super hard to trade away the pick that is Bijan Robinson. But if you did so, you would have won, right? Because Bijan could never have held the value that he held before he was an actual NFL player. He was destined to be a top 10, but not necessarily destined to be the number one running back in fantasy. And he didn't end up being the number one running back in fantasy. Now, he hasn't lost value, but he kind of did from that pick. So being able to sort of sell that pick, like right now, Caleb, people are sort of valuing him, that pick. Some are valuing him at his ceiling, which is like top 5, dynasty quarterback. Well, yeah, I'll sell at that price because that's the ceiling. I mean, he might be that, and if I can get that type of value, then I've sold even. But if he's not that, then I've profited. So it's a tough thing to do because, of course, I want to press the button for him. One other thing I wanted to mention that Chalk was talking about, it's like understanding the tiers is absolutely huge because we did that. I was in the 110, 111 area in a bunch of drafts, and the pick that was Dalton Kincaid, I traded many a times. I traded it for a future first and maybe a second or a third that year. And so I banked a future first, and I sometimes picked up Laporta, or I picked up Tank Dell or something like that. And so to have, or Jaden Reed, those were or maybe Marvin Mims too. Sorry, guys. But those are the types of players, those 4 guys were the types of players I was targeting there. And, Mims misses, but even still, even if that Mims misses, I have a future first in tow for that Dalton Kincaid pick. And I remember, Heath, you will remember this too. We remember the class with Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith and all those players. And it was Michael Carter and Trey Sermon were the 2 running backs. Yep. And I remember picking, if I had like 2 early thirds or a late second, I would trade those 2 picks. I did it in a number of drafts to get just ahead of the Trey Sermon, Michael Carter picks. And I ended up with Jalen Waddle, Elijah Moore. Now, Elijah Moore didn't exactly work out, but getting into that tier was a huge way to trade up. So I thought there was value trading up there. So it's really just understanding the value of, or at least the perceived value of what those players are and using your capital to move around the board to maximize value in your rookie draft.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Chalk, I want to make sure we have time to get into the Anatomy of series here in just a second here. So I do have one more question for you, and we'll just go to you on this one. Chapter 10, Bayesian Inference. What do these words mean together, and how does it apply to me having DJ Moore projected as a top 5 wide receiver 2 years ago and not last year?
Yeah, so it's Bayesian inference, be water, right? It's changing your opinions and takes about a player when you get new information. Every day we process so much content information on players but we still get stuck in take lock, which is kind of mind-boggling, right? Like we're hounded with new information, and what we need to do with Bayesian inference is take this new information, compare it to what we already know, and create a new or modified opinion, right? The only wrong take that you're really going to have is not being open to change, right? So, having DJ Moore, top 5 for, new consecutive seasons, right? But he wasn't producing, right? So like for those seasons before, like maybe he wasn't producing those top 5s, but now, we're seeing maybe that, he's starting to really, explode. So maybe we kind of go back into, considering that. And, real quick, I said I was going to talk about Brock Purdy, but I'm going to leave this as an example of Bayesian being water. The former Mr. Irrelevant, no draft capital. 49ers had Trey Lance, QB with high draft capital, all the hype in the world. And then Purdy came on the scene and produced at the high level at the end of last season. I mean, it wasn't a full sample size, but it was enough. Many refuse to change their perspective. Doubling, tripling down on Trey Lance is the guy, right? And what do we know, right? We know that that was a wrong take. So be flexible, read nuances, don't be prideful in your takes, and adjust.
Great stuff. Let's take one more short break, and then we will get into the anatomy of.
That was awesome.
Okay, we are back, Scott. We've got about 15 minutes here. Ought to be plenty of time. Just kind of tell everybody what the Anatomy of series is all about. I know I saw the Twitter thread about the quarterback position just a couple weeks ago. So just kind of break that down for us.
Yeah, it started, gosh, it's been like 5 years now or something like that. But I originally started it when there would be a lot of, what are they, spreadsheet, whatever you want to call them. These data guys that would put out R squared on like, they'd be like yards per route run or, some sort of thing. And they'd be like the R squared of this is that. And I found myself kind of understanding what they were talking about, but I kind of knew for sure that most gamers were like, what's this geeky stuff? And what they were basically trying to figure out, the data guys, was, is there any signal to looking at, this data point when evaluating, a prospect? And I thought, well, that's kind of cool, but they're not saying it right. They're not talking to the people. I said, let me dumb it down. I'm good at that. So I basically said, hey, look, this is a fun way to digest, the sort of profile of elite players, and so I just took, the top, whatever it was, the top 12 dynasty quarterbacks at the time. And I've done it every year since, or the top, 15 or 16 dynasty running backs at the time. And I just sort of took characteristics they share. Hey, what's the size of all these guys? Look at it and go, wow, they're all above 210. What a coincidence, or whatever the case might be. They all ran faster than 4.55. Who knew that 15 of the 15 ran that fast? So if you're looking at a guy who ran a 4.7, probably not, the guy potentially, or at least. So it's just a way to identify the sort of general profile of elite players at their position. And then you can take that information and sort of apply it to the incoming class. The other thing that's been really fun, Heath, with it, and now we're starting to get fun, is we're actually watching how that profile changes. I know you're going to get there. And that's been, a lot of people ask me, why didn't you just take the top 20, players over the last 5 years and look at it that way? And I said, well, I'm not looking back. I'm trying to look forward with this, so that was sort of the impetus of what it is. And I think people like interacting with it. It's fun.
Well, I think this is kind of a good place to combine, Chalk, what the last two things we've talked about. Like, yes, there is these qualities that these guys all share, but it's not necessarily going to be the same qualities 5 years from now, or even 2 or 3 years from now, right?
Bingo.
Yeah, exactly. And like Jax put out, like you said, Jax put out the quarterback thread just a couple weeks ago. And what I did was I kind of quote tweeted him, riding his coattails a bit. And I compared, right? Like, hey, this is the change in the rushing yards, right, that we're seeing in the anatomy, the thresholds, right? This is the change in efficiency metrics, right? And I started to kind of, break down in terms of like, okay, what are we seeing now? Quarterbacks are a little bit smaller, right? They're more mobile, right? They're more active. So like, we're starting to see a small change based off of the changing of the guard, right? So, applying the same principles of Bayesian, taking that new information and then applying it to what Jax is doing, right? And I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to combine those two processes.
So I do want to talk just a little bit about like how that profile has changed in the last 5 years. And I'll just kind of start by something that I seem to have noticed. Chuck, you said quarterbacks are getting a little bit smaller. Scott, it seems like almost everybody's getting smaller, right? Like these guys that have succeeded, and it kind of started, maybe it kind of started with that Waddle class, but last year we saw Tank Dell. Like we are seeing guys and just a bunch of running backs coming in that were too small that are now averaging 7 yards per carry somehow. Is it just like, is that a universal truth that the size requirements we used to have are not as important?
Yeah, Heath, it's pretty interesting because, I'm a little older, not to spoil the surprise, but, so I've been playing a long time. And for me, and I'm sure it's the same for you, Heath, when we're, 10 years ago playing fantasy football, Tank Dell would have been off my board. I wouldn't have even considered Tank Dell because there's no way he can compete on the outside. You need Michael Irvin, you need, Andre Johnson, you need these outside guys that can play through contact. They allow contact down the field. Remember when they actually said, look, you can't touch him after 5 yards. That was like a new rule. Like that wasn't like that. They were literally able to just, fist fight out there. That has totally changed. So the game is changing. Now there's more 3 wide receiver or even 4 wide receiver or even 5 wide receiver sets. More wide receivers are on the field. They're targeting the slot at a higher rate. The ADOT is coming down. They're actually targeting closer to the line of scrimmage. That doesn't seem to make sense, but that's what's happening. Passes are coming out quicker. Completion percentage is up. You can't hit the receivers, otherwise you're targeting. Helmet to helmet, out. So the smaller receivers benefit from that in every single way. And the anatomy led us to that. And absolutely, I was all over Tank Dell. And my, sort of who I am would have been out. But because we sort of said, hey, be Bayesian, let's look at this data. Let's actually understand that, that old thinking is changing, led us to players like Tank Dell and Devontae Smith. You remember BMI gate, we all had this thing. Can he succeed? And yeah, absolutely he can. Jordan Addison's another one. Zay Flowers is another one. There's a lot of these wide receivers that we were all hip to because of what, not just the anatomy, but what it sort of revealed to us. So yeah, absolutely 1000% we're seeing it.
And I try, Chuck, to not necessarily apply this the opposite way, but it does feel like the wide receivers that we've fallen in love with and seen miss lately have been the types of guys that we used to think were the only guys who could be number 1 wide receivers. And I don't want to bring up Hakeem Butler's name again, but we've done that a few times on this show. Those types of guys who have the body and look the part getting off the bus also seem to be the types that have been misses more lately. I wonder if that's because there are still certain general managers in the NFL that are valuing those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it right. The prototypical X receiver, the Alpha X, right? I mean, it's sadly a dying art, a dying archetype, And what we're seeing is like Jack said, and you kind of touched on, is those unconventional, divergent anatomies, right? Players that aren't fitting the typical physical mold of a wide receiver in terms of the height, weight, even BMI, right? The BMI truthers out there, pour one out to you. But if you're undersized, but you're explosive and you're a playmaker, then that's what we're looking at, right? And I think there's some signal that we can pick up in terms of finding out who's explosive, and those are the players that might be returning kicks in college, maybe not in the pros, but in college. Rush yards, like if they're being schemed into the run game a bit, they're manufacturing touches, like the teams are manufacturing touches for these receivers. I think those are things that kind of signal, potential, kind of unconventional elite receiver. But yeah, the 3-level threat, the queen chess piece type receivers, the alpha X's, I mean, seem to be a dying breed these days.
Yeah, it's funny, Heath, if I may. I was looking at this recently, especially because there's 3 prospects in this draft: Ad Mitchell, Brian Thomas, and who's the other one I'm forgetting? But regardless, and I look back, I'm like, who are these guys? Are they, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, right? There's been some hits, right? Or are they, you said Hakeem Butler, N'Keal Harry, Terrace Marshall? Because it seems like they go either one of 2 ways, right? They either sort of are hits or complete misses. There's no sort of in between. And I think it's what Chalk's even referencing and talking about. It's like that. If you're isolated to the outside and you really don't have any sort of special traits,
right,
you're probably not going to get the ball. If you can move around, or if you have special traits, a la AJ Brown is able to just catch a slant and kill you, like that's a special trait. Right. Michael Pittman is able to really win outside, but also move inside and run these intermediate routes. He's a target hog. So we've been looking at also one other thing is like targets earned per route run, things like that, because that led us to Puka Nacua. We were pro Puka. We weren't exactly sure, but, right, we got there with Puka. We really did. And so a lot of that was just sort of understanding that he was a target earner at the college level as well. Whereas Quentin Johnston, not quite as much. He was a sort of a big play guy, but he wasn't very special outside. So yeah, it's a tricky one, but I agree with you, man. It's such a puzzle.
So I want to get back to quarterbacks for just a second, because I did see your tweet about like what the current anatomy of a top 12 or top 15 quarterback looks like. What does that look like? And was there anything that you found this year that surprised you?
Well, not really. Actually I have it on paper too. So there you go. I got myself dialed in. Actually the thing that was interesting to me, I felt like, is like something that might actually disqualify a quarterback, like completion percentage at the college level, it really is a kind of a scary stat when you see a guy like that. And, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Anthony Richardson were really the only three players that had that sort of scary stat. But then we look at them and they were just so otherworldly in other ways. So I think sometimes we have to maybe squint a little bit at the quarterback position and lean into this sort of prolific, athletic archetype as well. And that's a bit scary because, that one's a coin flip. I mean, who knows when these guys actually, and look, they do have some issues. I mean, all three of them are not perfect throwers of the football,
Right.
but in today's game, they're able to make up for it with their, just unbelievable athleticism and gamesmanship.
As you can see here, if you're watching on YouTube, we did actually pull the tweet up. You can see what the anatomy of a top 15 quarterback in Dynasty looks like, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because you look at that stuff. I think that the other big thing, and John Lobb talks about it a lot, and I know Chalk loves this one, is actually the attempts or starts. We've seen Trey Lance, Mitch Trubisky, quite a few of these guys. Now another outlier in this is Anthony Richardson, which made him scary as a prospect. I said it last year. I mean, I was like, man, this is the scariest prospect yet. He's my quarterback one in Dynasty because of the upside, it's
right.
like, but boy, oh boy, was I scared. I was a little bit more scared of Trey Lance just because the thing about Trey Lance is he was not this amazing athlete. That's the thing that people forget. People are always like, no, Konami. No. Anthony Richardson is a real athlete. He's a Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts level athlete. Trey Lance was never that. So he had to win in the way that like Brock Purdy's winning, and he was unable to do so. But yeah, that college experience is huge. Look, a player that throws interceptions at a high rate in college usually does not change his stripes in the NFL as well. So yeah, those mistakes. I mean, Josh Allen was one of them. And look, people criticized them for that last year. So yeah, there you go.
Awesome stuff. I did want we'll finish this up here and see if we can apply it at all to rookie drafts that are upcoming in the next couple of months. Is there anybody, like when you went through this process this year, any prospects that you got more excited about or more concerned about?
Well, for me, it's Malik Neighbors. You just look at Malik Neighbors. He just looks like an absolutely prototypical stud in the NFL in today's game.
Right.
Marvin Harrison is a little bit more of a throwback player in terms of that outside winner. Look, he's exceptional out there. So I don't doubt that he's going to be successful in the NFL. But if you told me one of these guys is literally the wide receiver one in Dynasty in a year or year and a half, I'd pick Malik Neighbors over Marvin Harrison. I'm not saying he's a better overall prospect because I understand how great. Like, you just can't convince me that Marvin Harrison isn't exceptional, but Malik Neighbors is not to be overlooked.
That is awesome stuff. Again, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Chalk. Go follow these guys on Twitter at Dino Game Theory. For Scott, at 101 Chalk. For Chalk, go check these guys out at the Undroppables. You can read all about the Art of Dynasty, all about the anatomy of, and so much more. Go check them out wherever you can find podcasts. Appreciate everybody in the chat today and everybody listening wherever you can find podcasts. We will talk to you next Tuesday.